Everyone laughed at Florida for releasing thousands of rat-killing creatures. It sounded like a joke, not a plan. But the truth is, Florida didn't do this for headlines. It did it because the rat problem wasn't the start. It was the warning light. When predator pressure fades, rats don't just multiply, they get fearless. They hit storage, chew wiring, push into food areas. And suddenly it's not gross, it's daily damage. So Florida stopped asking, how do we kill more rats? And started asking what vanished that used to keep them nervous. Because that missing fear is the real control. And once you see what Florida decided to put back into the system, the headline stops sounding crazy and starts sounding overdue. Here's the part everyone skipped: the silent apocalypse. It used to feel endless. Shallow water sliding through sawgrass, birds rising and dropping like the place was breathing, small mammals moving along the edges, snakes doing the unglamorous work of keeping rodents honest, predators doing the unglamorous work of keeping everything else honest. The system looked stable, because stability is what healthy places look like. Then the quiet began. Not a single dramatic day, not one explosion on the news. More like subtraction. Fewer tracks where tracks used to be, fewer quick movements along the bank, fewer sightings of animals that once felt ordinary. A popular story traces the start to the early 1990s, when a major storm damaged facilities and escape tales began circulating. Another, less dramatic story is also true. People bought exotic pets, then released them when cute turned into too big. However it began, a foreign predator settled into warm wetlands that suited it perfectly. At first it was easy to dismiss. A sighting here, a photo there, but this invader was built for heat, humidity, camouflage, and patience. Once it had food, it had time. And once it had time, it multiplied. No one agrees on the exact number, because the terrain is huge, and the animal is designed to vanish. Some estimates land in the hundreds of thousands. Others argue lower. What everyone agrees on is simpler. It is enough to change the rules. In long-established areas, researchers documented sharp drops in small mammals. Raccoons fell by roughly 99.3%. Opossums dropped by roughly 98.9%. Bobcats fell by roughly 87.5%. Marsh rabbits became hard to find. Deer sightings fell by more than 90% in some monitored pockets. The exact numbers depend on where you measure, but the pattern is the same. The food web began hollowing out. And that matters beyond wildlife. This ecosystem supports tourism, fishing, flood buffering, and water supply protections that feed real lives. One economic estimate puts its yearly value around $31.5 billion. When a place like this thins out, the cost does not stay in the grass. Still, leaders did what humans often do with slow disasters. They tried to fight it like a simple problem with a simple solution: remove the invader. And that is where effort gets loud. But the enemy stays invisible. But before we go further, if you want the facts without the rabbit holes, subscribe. We sort through the noise so you don't have to. Desperation and failure. The first response was predictable. Remove the invaders. Find them, capture them, kill them, repeat. For a while, it looked like progress. Big removals make good headlines. Hunting drives create a sense of action. Competitions turn despair into something people can join. One annual event became a symbol of the fight. Participants traveled from across the country and beyond, wading into heat and mosquitoes with hooks and bags. Some years, hundreds of snakes were removed. Winners were celebrated. The footage was intense enough to convince casual viewers the tide was turning. But then the math hit. Hundreds removed sounds huge, until you compare it to a population that can be tens of thousands or far more, spread through a landscape that hides them perfectly. During mating seasons, a single female can lay close to 100 eggs. One successful breeding season can replace a lot of hard work. So the state paid professionals to hunt year-round. Agencies hired teams with training and steady budgets. The work was not glamorous. It was long days of heat, water, cuts, and mosquitoes, punctuated by short moments of success. And even success felt small because the enemy was not lined up for capture. It was scattered, silent, and patient. They used technology too. Dog teams trained to follow scent, drones scanning open areas, camera traps that stare down the same corridor every night, scout snakes fitted with transmitters so teams could locate breeding females, because finding one hidden nest can matter more than catching 10 random individuals. Global positioning system trackers helped researchers understand movement corridors. Data teams blended reports from sanitation crews, land managers, and utility repairs to map where risks overlapped. Warm canals, levees, edges where human food systems meet wild cover. Some experiments used lures designed to mimic heat and scent. Others used careful tracking to intercept animals before they reached breeding zones. Every new approach sounded like the breakthrough. Then the numbers stayed stubborn. The wetlands are too wide. The predator is too hidden. The reproduction is too fast. Even when removal is real, it can feel like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. That is the point where serious people start saying the quiet sentence no one likes. Full eradication may be impossible. Not because humans are lazy, but because the habitat is too big. The animal is too good at disappearing, and the timeline is too long. Once you accept that, the question changes. If you cannot simply erase the invader, what can you rebuild so the system stops unraveling? That question would have been hard enough on its own. Then scientists found a second problem inside the first one, and the story stopped being snake versus swamp and became ecosystem versus chain reaction. The hidden hitchhiker. The big snakes stole attention, but ecosystems hide worse surprises behind the headline. A parasite arrived with the invasion and began slipping into local food chains. Researchers linked it to lung infections in native snakes, weakening animals that used to be part of the wetland's everyday pest control. The details are the kind you do not forget once you picture them. A native snake that cannot breathe well, cannot hunt well. A snake that cannot hunt well loses weight. A snake that loses weight becomes easier to displace, less likely to reproduce, and less able to play its role. And the parasite does not need the big invader to keep moving. It can travel through the food web, eggs passed in waste, insects feeding, small prey swallowing, then native snakes eating that prey and inheriting the infection without knowing it. That matters because native snakes are not scenery. They are pressure on rodents. They are part of why certain pests do not explode around human food and human waste. Take away that pressure, and you get the small, expensive consequences people recognize. Chewed wiring, contaminated storage, closed kitchens, and an endless cycle of traps and poison. When those native snakes weaken, rodents are often the first to take advantage. Rodents breed fast. They exploit gaps. They slip into kitchens, sheds, docks, and storage rooms. They become the visible sign of a hidden collapse. So the fight was now two fights at once. On the surface, an invasive predator that could not be caught fast enough. But underneath, a weakening of native predators that used to keep smaller problems from exploding. Once you see that, the phrase rat-killing creatures stops sounding like a joke and starts sounding like a desperate shorthand for a real need. Rebuild the pressure that keeps rodents from turning every corner into a buffet. That is where the controversial plan entered the room, not as a stunt, as restoration. But the public did not hear restoration. The public heard they're releasing predators, and the internet laughed louder. That is why the plan sounded backward, until you understood what was actually being released. The laughable plan. The announcement sounded like a dare. Fight an invasive snake crisis by releasing more snakes. People compared it to old mistakes from other places, where introducing one species to solve a problem created a bigger disaster. Others asked the simplest question: does this state not have enough reptiles already? The plan's defenders said something that rarely wins online: it is complicated. They were not adding a new invasive predator. They were returning a threatened native predator that had been fading for decades due to habitat loss and human pressure. The idea was not to unleash an army overnight. It was to rebuild a population slowly in carefully chosen areas with monitoring, tracking, and habitat work. And this is where the headline tricks you. Thousands makes it sound like somebody opened a truck and dumped animals into the dark. The reality is closer to a slow refill. Small releases, repeated. Years of captive breeding, years of land management, years of building the conditions first, because predators do not thrive on publicity. This also explains the rat-killing label. The predator being restored is known for eating rodents, but it is also known for eating other snakes. In the simplest terms, it touches both problems at once. It pressures rodents that surge when native snakes weaken, and it pressures the snake community in places where young invaders move through. Still, simple terms are not enough for trust. Viewers want to know what kind of creature could do this without becoming a new problem itself. So, before you judge it, meet the missing ruler. Meet the emperor of the forest. This snake is large, dark, and calm in a way that surprises people. It is non-venomous, yet it behaves like it belongs at the top of its neighborhood. That is why it has been called an emperor. Not because it is loud, but because it moves with confidence. It eats widely: rodents, frogs, lizards, birds' eggs, and other snakes, including venomous ones. That diet matters because it links two problems that often spiral together. When rodents rise, disease risk rises. When smaller snakes shift, the whole food chain shifts. A predator that can touch both is valuable. It also changes behavior without needing to be seen. Predators create fear. Fear creates shorter foraging runs. Shorter runs mean less exposure, less impact, and fewer bold daytime movements. In a system that has been losing pressure, even a small return of fear can bend routines. But here is the part that makes this restoration hard. The Emperor relies on habitat that most people never notice: underground burrows, healthy pine systems, sandy ridges that are not cut into fragments, land that is managed with fire and patience, not only with fences. When those foundations are gone, the Emperor has nowhere to be an emperor. That is why it faded in the first place. The decline was not a single event. It was decades of habitat loss, overcollection, and disturbance. In some areas, practices meant to target other snakes harmed the Emperor too, because it hides in the same burrows. So when the restoration plan began, it was not release and prey. It was restore land, restore burrows, raise snakes, track them, repeat. Slow work, and slow work creates a different kind of suspense. Not, will this explode tomorrow, but will this hold long enough to become real? Viewers always want proof. They want to know whether slow means smart, or whether slow is just what people say when nothing happens. Nature does not wait for meetings. It responds in scraps and surprises. Nature fights back. For a long time, the invasion felt one-sided. The invaders ate. The natives disappeared. The silence spread. Then, small moments began to show up that made researchers pause. A native predator was filmed taking a young invader. An alligator was spotted eating a smaller snake that did not belong there. In a few rare cases, cameras caught reversals that looked impossible, helped by cold snaps and bad timing. These scenes are not common, but they matter because they break the myth that the invaders are untouchable. Even one confirmed reversal changes how people think about the food web. It suggests the system still has tools, even if those tools are not enough on their own. And the restored emperors fit into that picture. They are not superheroes, they are pressure, especially on juveniles, which is how long wars are actually won. Still, a few kills do not rebuild a whole web. That is why teams look for a higher standard of proof. Then the argument ends and the measuring begins. Proof without confetti. The first sign was boring, which is exactly why it mattered. Tracking points, confirmed sightings, animals moving along the right corridors, using burrows and cover like they belonged there. In restoration work, boring is the goal. Boring means the animal is finding food. Boring means it is not behaving like a confused captive. Boring means the land is offering what it needs. Then came the milestone everyone waits for: wild-born young. When a reintroduced predator produces offspring in the wild, it means the place is doing more than tolerating it. The place is supporting it. Food is there. Shelter is there. The system is functioning enough for a new generation to begin. That does not erase the invasion. It does not mean the wetlands are saved. It does not even mean the predator will spread quickly. It means something more honest. The project is not theater. And once a new generation exists, the logic of the plan becomes easier to see. This was never about winning in one season. It was about restoring pressure over many seasons, so smaller problems do not explode and the system becomes harder to hijack. There were also other signs, smaller and harder to film. In pockets where pressure returned, some native predators began challenging the invaders more often. Rare footage suggested the invaders were not always untouchable. Cold snaps, vulnerable juveniles, and changing territories created moments where the apex label looked less permanent than it once did. None of that is a victory parade. It is a shift, and shifts are how ecosystems heal when they can heal. Still, no plan is free. No plan is perfect. The honest version includes costs, setbacks, and trade-offs. And then the story earns trust by admitting what can go wrong. Costs, trade-offs, and why it is still worth it. Reintroducing predators means living with complexity. People will misidentify snakes. Pets will roam where they should not. Roads will cut through habitat. Storms will rearrange everything overnight. Good seasons will be followed by harsh ones. There is also the parasite problem, which does not vanish just because you restore one species. Hidden infections can keep moving through food webs, weakening native snakes, and reopening gaps that rodents can exploit. Even if the big invaders were reduced, a parasite that has spread into native species could keep the system under stress, and the invasion itself continues. Large, invasive snakes still breed. They still spread. Even heavy removal programs only thin the edge of a much larger problem. So why keep going? Because doing nothing is not neutral. Doing nothing means accepting a slow collapse in a system that supports water quality, flood buffering, tourism, and daily life for millions. It means accepting the normalization of silence. Restoration is a refusal to normalize loss. It is also a lesson in how nature actually works. Nature does not solve problems with one heroic moment. It changes behavior through pressure. It makes some choices costly and others safer. Over time, populations bend. That is the bet here. Restore pressure, reduce opportunity, and let the system do what it used to do, little by little. Which brings us back to the headline that made everyone laugh. The truth is this. The plan was not crazy. The situation was. In the third sentence is where the name matters. Florida did not gamble because it loves strange ideas. It tried them because the normal ideas were not enough anymore. You cannot fix a complex ecological collapse with a single tool. You can remove invaders. You can fund hunters. You can run competitions, you can use drones and trackers and dog teams, but if you never rebuild the missing pressure that invaders exploited, the system stays fragile. The rat-killing creatures headline is a messy summary of a smarter plan. Restore threatened native predators that can push rodents down and compete in the snake world where young invaders survive. It is not a miracle, it is a slow correction. And the most uncomfortable lesson is not about snakes, it is about attention. We are quick to laugh at weird headlines. We are slow to notice collapse until it shows up as outages, disease, and daily problems we cannot ignore. If you want to know whether this plan will work long term, watch for boring signs, more ordinary wildlife returning, fewer gaps being exploited, and fewer small problems turning into big ones. Because when a system starts healing, it does not shout, it breathes. Before we wrap up, remember what this story really says. When a system loses its predators, it loses its discipline. When discipline disappears, rodents and other opportunists do not need permission, they take it. That is how a place can look normal while it is breaking underneath. The plan people mocked was not about spectacle, it was about structure. Rebuild missing pressure, tighten the easy food, and let nature do its work. You do not need to live near wetlands to learn from that. Now tell me this, what is the silent problem where you live? The one people joke about instead of fixing? Drop it in the comments. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.